Well met, everyone. I am Rich the Lich, and today I'd like to finish up a little bit of details on this new world map, this new brainstorming little bit that I went over on a video a couple of days ago, where I was creating a new world and showing you my process of world building and not just how to make the map sort of skill set wise in Photoshop and what tools and tricks and things like that I can use, but also just the brainstorming and the creative process of world building. So if you watch that first video, you'll know that what I have here is a continent, a place where the entire flow and rhythm of this civilization is there is this ancient dragon, something larger than life, larger than an ancient. We're thinking Tiamat, demigod, Titan level. So this ancient dragon died thousands of years ago, ancient history, things that are not immediately relevant to the current time period where I plan on bringing my PCs into this campaign world. But evidence of that dragon has created this mountain range, and that's what this part here is. If I was to use a red color to sort of highlight this mountain range right here, is formed by the spine, the fossils of the dragon that has died. And as a result, people of various walks of life, various races, have flocked to this continent because they believe that by being in proximity to this range, they're going to be blessed with some sort of dragon-like power. So of course there's an entire faith, there's religions, cults, and various things like that. What I did here is I created a single location right here and then another one here of sort of the two main cities on this continent. There's a little bit of scale here, so you get a little bit of perspective of you're looking at about each of these two cities is probably 400 miles apart, divided conveniently by the mountain range, which sort of breaks the continent into two halves, a west and an east. And I may have these two as sort of opposing forces, meaning their interpretation of the dragon god is this group here might be, they're interpreting it as a golden dragon, so something good, benevolent, where these guys interpret the dragon as sort of acidic and evil and black. So where I want to go with that, that's something for sort of the next step. For the purpose of this video, I didn't mean to erase that, sorry. What I want to do is I want to just show you this is more Photoshop skill set stuff, where I'm going to show you kind of how I clean this stuff up and what I do for various points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start chipping away at the continent. Okay. Now I have a grunge brush that I will often use, and you can see it looks like this here. There we go. So there's this shape here, which if I was to zoom in, brush size, you can see it's kind of jagged. It's really organic. And I want my coastlines to have a little bit of that look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up this continent a bit and just create a little more diverse, varied and interesting coastline. Okay. Nothing too crazy. It's completely free form. I don't know where I'm going with it. So there isn't anything that I need to do here that's too noodling and detaily. Okay. So I'm going to create this bit here like this. I'm maybe going to break this up a little more, create a little more of a dynamic edge to this side, say this sort of a long kind of peninsula. And all I'm doing is I'm just using this as an eraser, but this brush type, which creates this kind of jagged edge, and I'm just brushing the edges, kind of tapping down on my Wacom tablet, just being really loose and free with it, and just trying to create some interest. That's all. Nothing excessive here, and not knowing where I'm going with it. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to clean up some of my labeling from the previous video. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that right there. So I think this is details here, yeah. So see, I'm going to get rid of this. And what else? I'm going to get rid of these dots where I was kind of highlighting where some cities might be. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a texture over the top of it all. So I'm going to open up a folder that I have, and it has a bunch of image reference textures. I'm going to just simply grab sort of this one here, Control A, Control X, which is basically cut and paste, or put it on the clipboard. Control V is paste. I don't want that dot there. Now here's an interesting thing. I can use something called the clone stamp tool, and I can hold down Alt to click, and it'll define this point right here where I click. And now when I brush over, I'm creating, see what I mean? I just got rid of that. So I'm brushing over with its own little separate area. Okay, I do want these little fibers from the paper, so I don't want to go completely over too much of it. All right. The other thing you can do is you can change the opacity so that it's not such a harsh edge when you brush over the top. But you can see how you can clean up all these blemishes. This is kind of what they'll do a lot of times in magazine covers and whatnot, where the models always look perfect, right? So what I'm going to do here is I've already got my continent. I hold down Control and I left click on the layer palette itself, and you can see that we have the outline of the continent. And now on my texture layer, if I just Shift Control I, which is inverse, it's selecting everything outside of those marching ants. I hit backspace, it's going to get rid of it. Now Control D to deselect to get rid of the marching ants. And now I'm just going to play with blending modes. I just use the arrow keys on my keyboard up and down until I find something that kind of looks neat for me. That one works. Okay, everything's kind of dark. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean up the mountain range a bit. Okay, we're going to zoom in here. I can use this as a guideline, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flat out draw mountains. Okay, so I'm going to use black, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the details of this layer to 50%. It's really dark, so let's set it to 10%. Okay, so it's there. I can see it. But what I'm doing now is I'm just drawing from scratch. All right, so we'll use maybe like this here. Okay, there we go. It's a new layer. We're going to call this mountains. And let's just start doing some good bits. So I'm going to get some big lines thrown down. I don't want to get too much disjointed, or I don't know what the word is. I don't want to disconnect things too much, because remember, this is supposed to be a spinal cord. So it's the, if you were to look at prehistoric, the dinosaur, what is he, Stegosaurus or something? The guy with here's the big giant dinosaur. And then this dude. Right? Yeah, that was wonderful. But you get it. So that's kind of the vibe I'm looking for. I'm going to just draw some initial peaks. Now here's another thing to consider. The larger you make your mountains, the more it's going to affect the scale of your map. Not everything needs to be Everest. You're in a fantastical world, so you can certainly make things absurdly large. You can have mountains that are higher, taller, the God's Peaks, which are 37,000 feet high, which I believe is higher than Everest. So, it doesn't have to follow all the rules of normal real world stuff. But, just be aware of the aesthetics of how a thing looks on the map. Also, of course, naturally, the larger it is, the more it's going to draw the reader's, your player's eye. And it might become a place where they're like, oh, we need to go investigate that. Why are those peaks so big? Maybe you can do that for sort of a central volcanic peak. That might work. But, I'm going to erase these here because I started with a certain kind of flow to my brush and my line quality. And as I started to go through, it started to look too different. So there we have it, right? We have some basics. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of or actually I'm just going to stay with this thick line. And I'm going to just kind of start connecting the ridge lines a little bit, right? Because you would not have these free-flowing peaks that just sort of come from nowhere. Like everything, look at any Google image of a mountain range, you know what I mean? And you will see that these are all just rock formations, that have jutted upon one another. So we're going to go like this, okay? And the connection of these ridge lines also kind of creates the feeling of a spinal cord. So it gives that aesthetic. Now, if you have the artistic ability to really create these dragon-formed skeleton, and you actually draw the skeleton of a dragon, I'm not that good artistically. So I can create the visual idea of it so that players, or especially the prospective audience, if this was to be a world that I'm building for, public release, where players and people and DMs that I would never speak to in person might be running this, I can give them the idea that this is what I'm trying to run with, is this dragon spine mountain range, which is from the actual anatomy of a dragon. But in description, I can explain it, and just simply say that these ranges, these peaks, are actually the backbone, the spines of a dragon, of a fallen dragon. And that's going to be sufficient. If you can draw it, then sure, great, it looks wonderful. But You don't have to worry about that as much. So there we go. We have that, right? I know there's that sort of gray shadow underneath, but that's the actual mountain range that I already had there, which I can get rid of. As you see, if I get rid of that, it cleans it up a little bit. Okay. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to make, that's a brush size of 3. I'm going to go a brush size of 1, and I'm going to just start creating, and I'm at 400%. So a lot of this detail, it'll read a little better when I zoom out to natural, normal, sort of map print size, because you're not going to be viewing it in this zoomed in pixelated video gamey view. So what I'm doing here, you can see, is I'm just creating, again, the mountain range, the rocks and the crags and the various valleys, the places where PCs can adventure. They don't just stop, things trail off into hills and various things like that. So this is the main sort of selling point, the focal point of this region. So I can really obsess about this mountain range. Do I want this level of detail in all my other mountains? Yes, if you're trying to create some really cool looking map aesthetically, something that a PC or a player of D&D or a fan of fantasy isn't going to use it as an actual game. They're not going to run in it, but they just simply want your map to print on their wall for just, cool office decor. Then yes, you can obsess about making these mountains look really good, but you also might want some contrast. Maybe my other mountains don't look this good with this level of highlighting and shadow and cracks and crags and detail, because the mountains in those other areas are just terrain pieces, where here, this is the architectural, if you will, or the terrain focal point of the entire region. It's these mountain ranges which, once again, represent the spine of the dragon. That is the entire reason why various factions and races have flocked to this area. It's the whole reason why people are coming here. So you want this level of obsessiveness and this detail here. Whereas if, how I have that capital city is just sort of a blob, or maybe your cities are a larger circle filled in for a capital city and a smaller circle for a regular city or a town. If your city is the focal point where, golden walls and, walled castles or castles everywhere and palaces and, very New York skyscrapery, maybe when you draw that city icon, you draw it with more detail so that you have some difference. You've got some bits that the PCs can kind of say, why does that city look different? Like, is that important? Well, yeah, that's a major hub for blah, blah, blah. So as we made these cracks coming into it, right, I need a little more off of here to add a little more depth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that these start turning into some hills. Let me save it before I lose all this work. Okay, I don't need too many here. I think by this point I can turn off the details because it's just getting in my way now. I don't need to see that so much anymore. Right? The terrain leading up to these mountains, very rarely, it's just this stark blank landscape, and then there's just this peak, as you're going to have miles and miles of lead into this. And also, if you watch my first video, this is where I talked about with these mountains and hills, or these hills, I should say, this is where a lot of the cults have sort of resided. This is where there's small little towns and hamlets and villages nestled up in the hills. They can't quite go up into the peaks. They don't have the means climbing gear. Maybe the terrain is a little more inhospitable. It's frozen peaks and jagged cliffs and stuff like that PCs or various characters, NPCs can't go into. But they can certainly have a town right in here, and a dwarven village over here. You can certainly have various groups and people living among these things. So these hills can be very important because this is where adventure happens. This is where the PCs actually can go. Maybe they'll never actually be able to make their way onto these, the tops of these peaks, but among these mountains and various things like that. And you can start to create sort of smaller peaks off to the side. I'm not going to do that for this video, but you can create sort of areas where they indicate what happened to the chain of mountains and ridges that connect it to the main mountain range. Is that broken off, or you know what I mean? When I've watched enough movies on Everest and the folk that are trying to climb Everest, where they've got to go to base camp, and they've got to acclimate for 9-10 months in the region before they even begin the climb. of that treacherous peak, you see that there's a lot of mountains that sort of are separated from Everest proper, if you will. So, you know, don't just create those things because they make sense realistically. Create them because they provide an opportunity for interesting adventure, for some cool things to happen. You know, and as you build that visual library, I'm reminded, as I played enough Skyrim, when I'm out there, you know, getting the various, what are they, the walls where you get the various shouts, I'm reminded and kind of thinking of areas where I was up there and I fought a dragon priest, I think. You know, and I'm up in the mountain ranges and I'm climbing those walls and I'm in the hills. I don't know if I was here or if I was just down in here, you know, and just creating that diverse area and terrain is a good thing, you know, because you just, like I said, you essentially just create some interesting bits. So now that we have that, notice how that looks. If I turn this off, this is what we had before. If I was to make this at 100%, it gave me the creative flow and the process of what I want to do. But as I said, now that I start cleaning it up, it starts feeling like a little more of a map. I'm putting a little more logic and detail to it because I've committed to it mentally. I like that I want to have this Dragon Spine mountain range as sort of the catalyst for this entire continent existing. But now I can start cleaning it up. Look at those details. Look how much better that looks, right? So I'm going to leave that mountains as sort of a multiply layer, okay? And then what I'm going to do is underneath it, I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to call this mountains color. Using color, we can start to create, see, some details there. Now that's the same color, so what it's doing is it's sort of chipping. You don't see the line work underneath it, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to put this on overlay. I know that that's just a mode that works well. See what I mean? Think of where your light's going to come in from. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say my light is coming in from this way, okay? And keep that consistency through your whole map. So as I zoom in here, and I just make the brush a little smaller, I can maybe put this guy at 60%. I'm drawing a little bit, almost too much of the shadow, because I'm doing it on this whole side. But I can fix that a little bit afterwards. Now, so you don't get this harsh edge of where it sort of transitions into normal terrain, what you can do is lower the opacity to like 10%, and I can start, it almost has like this airbrush quality. See what I'm doing here? Is I'm blending it a little more. Is I'm drawing, 10% means I'm only putting about 10% of the ink, the brush down. And I'm drawing, see how that looks? Much better, right? And then I will go back up to 60%. Keep the brush big so I can get it done. Okay, and we're coloring in these, we're kind of shading in this side of the mountain range, right? Because that's where the light's coming from. Boom, almost done. There we go. Comes down to the bottom. Beautiful, perfect. And then once again, 10% so that we don't have those harsh lines. I'm zoomed in a lot so you can see all this stuff. It's going to look even better when I'm zoomed out because you won't see as many of the little imperfections. In Photoshop, Control plus zooms in, Control minus zooms out. I'm going to zoom in a bit, or make the brush size bigger, I should say, so I can kind of clear up or get through this terrain area a little bit faster. See, this would kind of ride into the coastline a little, so good. Okay, so we're here. You can tell we've got a little bit darker. I'm going to create another layer of dark, but I'm going to do the light first. And then as I create these layers of light and dark, you know, where the ridge line is just really filled in and various things like that, what it's going to do is it's going to start to create depth with your mountains. So now we're going to go light. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit I for eyedropper tool. I'm going to pick this color here, which I like. And then I'm going to go into my color picker and I'm going to make it really light. So we're going to go like this. Hit B for brush. And now I'm going to brush at about 70%. Okay. But you can see what I'm doing is I'm going along this edge now. Now, notice the way this peak is right here. If I go to red real quick to highlight it, the way this peak is right about this ridge line. It's hard to see it. Let me do this real quick. Hold on. this ridge line right here, up to about right there, you don't see the right face of it, right? So I don't need to create any highs on that point, okay? And I lost my brush, so that sucks. I need to find that color again. Good enough. And it's close. Those little variations, though, in your highlights and your colors are a good thing. So this is 60%. Yeah, it's there. Okay. So it looks like I went a little lighter, so I'll clean it up here. See what I mean? Is we're going to go here. So this whole side of the range is going to start to be much lighter. Okay? So I'm not sure what happened here, but it looks like, see, there it is again. There's that long ridge right down through here, which I don't need the highs on. And I'm spending some time following my lines. I'm not just doing this. Okay? You know, so make it look good. It'll pay off later. Here, you're only seeing almost all the highs, where there wasn't a lot of dark on that side, right? But you can see we're creating this. Okay, cool. And I know it takes a while, but it'll be worth it. You know, it's worth it in the end. It just looks good towards the back end. So now I'm going to go 10%, just like I did with the other one. And I'm going to start to create some highs because the light is shining on these areas, on this whole side of the range. What it's doing, though, is it's blending these lines a little better, so it's not such a drastic transition. The colors blend a little bit better. Okay, so there we go. We have that, right? Good enough. That looks really good. Now we're going to go really dark, so we'll use this, okay? And we're going to come in here, real small brush, but we're going to put it at 100% opacity. And we're just going to create some really hard lines here. Yeah, we're at full darkness. Hell, we'll just make it black. Okay, it's not standing out a lot, and the reason why is I'm still on overlay. So I'm going to create another one. That was sort of Mountains Color 1. This is the Mountains Color 2. Mountains Color 1 is on overlay, which creates the initial layer of depth. But now Mountains Color 2, I'm leaving that on its own blending mode, regular normal, which now I'm actually just making black lines at this point, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that idea of the black lines as a way to sort of create some kind of cross-hatching, right? But what it's going to do is it's going to create some really dark areas, because now I'm not blending in with the colors underneath. I'm not blending in with the texture of that layer underneath it, right? I'm creating some real hard, jagged lines here. It's very pixelated, but it'll look good when I zoom out, I hope. See what I'm doing here is I'm kind of following my pattern a little bit, but I'm just creating. If I was to show you real quick, what I'm doing is if there's a mountain here and there's a ridge line, like if this is a peak, and I want the light to be from this side, what I would do is I would just create these hash marks like this. See what I mean? And as you do that, you're just creating some interesting texture. And then this side would be the light side, okay? So that's all I'm doing right there with this step. But it's creating some real dark edges. And I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of making hash marks, because I feel like when you start creating this hash this way and then this way, you're using this crosshatch pattern to create a lot of dark areas. So if when I do the light side, I'm just actually going to create dots, just dots of white. See, so I'm eating away at the texture a little bit. Now this is on its own layer, or not the texture. I'm eating away at the line work from my mountains. So maybe I won't leave it this. I might break down the opacity a little bit, right? So you could see it really, I want to call it darkified. It really darkened this whole thing, right? A lot. You know, there's a lot more darkness going on here. But what I can do, since it's on its own layer, you know, wonderful. So let's zoom out. Let's see what we got. See what I mean right there? We've got a lot of contrast now. But I can take this layer and I can just turn it down to like 50%. Okay? 60%. Good enough. So it adds darkness, but I'm not blotching out the line work. Now, for the highlight area, I'm staying on the same one, which is a normal blending mode. Okay, now we're just going to go straight white. And this, I'm just going to make some dots. I'm not doing the crosshatch thing. Okay, I'm just going to make some dots where there's some, you know, the tops of certain peaks are super cool. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 70%. It's going to make the darks darker, but it'll make my highs stand out a little bit more. And this is just pure white. But because of my opacity, you don't see it as much, right? If I was to be at 100%, it would just look like white dots. But here I'm kind of staying with the color scheme of the mountain range, which is kind of this brownish, right? Very dirt, whatever. If I want to say, it can kind of start to inform which cult of dragon might be more right than the other. I can kind of change the hue saturation of this and make it start looking reddish, which basically is informing to everyone, well, maybe it really was a red dragon that died there. Though the guys that follow the cult of the red, they're more correct. But that's going to be a complete, you know, disrespect to the cult of the green or the black, because it's like, why is the mountain range kind of reddish a hue, a reddish tint? But you can go that way. You know what I mean? Whatever. Maybe even for a DM, you know, some cool bits is as you start running your groups through these campaigns, through this campaign, and as it changes. So see what I mean? Is there? We got just a little bit. Now, do I want to create some highs and lows on the hills? Yeah, because I feel like I was starting to... The hills didn't mesh well with the rest of the piece. So here I'm being a little more loose with it. I know I'm going off on tangents because I'm in art mode at the same time. Yeah, there might be a little dot of highs on this side where the light will catch kind of coming off the peaks. But otherwise, the ones real close, I don't need too much going on. So we'll go like this. Where was I going? So what I was saying is, as the GM, you know, maybe during one campaign, the cult of the green is starting to stand out more. And you can just redo the map and print it out, but change the hue saturation to green color. So now the range all of a sudden looks like greenish. And now the last bit is I'm going to go back to black, and I'm going to kind of fill in these real small and just make some small little dots. This is detail work in the mountains, but it's just little bits that as you do this through the rest of the map and the rest of the continent, it really starts to look pretty damn good. Okay, and I'm at about a half hour here of video, so I'm going to kind of cut this. See, now I'm just kind of drawing a little more, but I feel like it's adding some more cohesion, and it's just allowing the shadows to kind of trickle into the mountain or the hills. So it makes it look, see what I mean, is it's creating some changes in the terrain. It makes it look like it all fits in and belongs. Someone didn't just plop down, you know, a kid didn't just take his bucket of sand and build little sand mounds within these mountains. No, these hills fit. See what I mean? Is I'm just creating this architectural kind of cohesion, or this terrain cohesion a little bit, where I'm creating these lines. But it's these little details that I don't know where they're coming from, but I feel like my eye is just drawn to them a little more. But it ends up creating a mountain range with just loads and loads of depth, right? I said in the first video I wasn't going to name this Dragonspine Mountains, but it fits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the video by giving you a little label. So here's where we are. See what I mean? Is we've got just right there. I mean, I think that looks a lot. If I was to turn these three off and put this on, yeah, that gave us the idea, but visually it didn't stand out for a cool map, right? So we're going to go like that. Okay, we'll leave it there. I can play with hue saturation a little more and brightness and contrast and create even more diversity. But as we fill it in with various roads and towns and rivers and things coming off of the mountain range, it's going to look a lot cooler. But there's an aesthetic there that looks kind of like a centipede, right? It looks a little bit like there is something going on with actual anatomy of a creature. So what I do now is I use a pen tool, and I'm going to follow the ridge a little bit. I don't want the words to be unreadable, so I don't want to go crazy with it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here and draw and pull here, and then we'll come down and pull here. Now, I drew that little path. If I now just take T for type tool and I mouse over, it's going to change the icon. And there you have it. It's following the path. Now, I need to make this a lot bigger because I can't see too much of the cool bits. And obviously I'm going to go with, let's kind of follow the same sort of aesthetic. We're going to go kind of orangish, maybe. Put it over the top. There, that's better. I'm not going to put it in bold. We'll leave it in regular. And then I am going to put like a little, let's just do a stroke of black. 1 pixel, just so it's a little more readable. But I'm going to create like a 200 distance. See what I mean? Is it spread the words out a little bit. You know what? I'm going to get rid of that. Because I've made those changes, here, let's do a copy layer style. I want to follow a different path. I think it's just going to flow a little bit sweeter. So we're going to go this way and then this way. Like that. You don't want too jagged and crazy snake-like because then the words are going to, it's not going to look right. Dragon Spine Mountains. That might work. Right? I know it's a little wonky. You can maybe go the opposite direction as well, so that I'm reading from sort of bottom to top, but whatever. It's sufficient. It'll fit. Now, if I put it over the mountains, not only are you going to lose some of the detail and the coolness of it, I need to put like a drop shadow so it stands out. But if I just kind of leave it here, I can rotate it a little bit, kind of fit it in. We'll put that texture. There it is, Dragon Spine Mountains. I'm going to go a little bit lighter. I don't like that. There, that's nice. I like that. Okay. Well, let's put the Dragon Spine. And the M Mountains. Dragon Spine Mountains. See what I mean? But we have something there going on, right? And what I can do is I can take a different style. That's what they call a sans serif font. So the edges don't have a lot of flourishes and little squigglies off the end. I can now take another font like Merriweather, and we'll call this Voragath's Realm. I don't know what the hell that is. No. Voragath. And then we're going to go Merriweather. We're going to put it on a curve right here. Boom. Voragath's Realm. It didn't keep my my stuff, Bookmania. There it is. 34. Right? It was big. And then 500. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to mess with the curve a little more. Like this. Better. Much better. Where do we want this? We'll go this way. That'll work. Whatever. We're going to put that layer style on it. Oh, but the color was really dark, right? Voragath's Realm. Good enough. Layer style's a little too much. 2 pixels. Good. And then we just dump the opacity down. Maybe make it there, separator. Okay? Make it even bigger. 50. But I need to use this thing to stretch out that line a bit. Like that. There, it fits. Cool. We'll go like that. Boom. Okay? So this continent is called Voragath's Realm, or whatever the hell you want to call it. Right? But it's enough that you can see what the name of the continent is, but we're not taking away from the... So there we go. That is continent number 1 of my world map, right? And now as I really start to clean things up, I can turn off the scale. I can change this. Check this out. We're going to go... I always like this kind of weird greenish whatever. We'll go like this. Boom. Now, check this out. We're going to find another texture. Let's use this one, which I've used before. No, not yet. We'll bring that one in a minute. That has some cool bits. Yes, I'm using stuff from online and whatnot. A lot of textures I have paid for. Just demo purposes, folks. Don't kill me. I kind of like that weird burnt edge a little bit. Maybe it's a little too harsh in the corner. So we'll go like that. And now I'm going to put this texture over the top of... Boom. We'll go like this. We'll grab another one, which is that Mediterranean one. Control A, Control X. We'll bring it in here. Bring this guy in. This one I'm going to change the hue saturation. Image, adjust. Desaturate it so there's no whatever. No colors. That already looks better. And then we're going to darken, and then we're just going to turn this opacity down so that the lines don't eat away. But there's something there. Cool. Check this out. here's what we're looking at, right? This stuff looks so much better. Remember that clone stamp tool? I can take it over the top of this and get rid of some of this stuff, even at 10%, so it's subtle. Just so you're like, what the hell does that say? I don't want that to distract your eye from the coolness of what's going on my continents, and so on and so forth, right? And here's where you can also start cleaning up your textures, where you're not going to get in trouble, you know, for printing stuff, because now it doesn't even look like the original. I can just start getting rid of these coffee stains. See what I mean? And now it's not the coffee stained texture anymore, and so on and so forth. So there we go. We can start going like this. I don't know what the navigation lines are, this and that and the other thing, but, you know, I've even found like old parchments of poems and poetry and ancient written text, and I've laid it over the top blending modes, and all of a sudden it looks like what's going on over there. And you can see what I mean is we have a world map that starts looking like something at this point. There you have it. You know, so that's it for this video. I'm going to finish up this continent before we start delving into other continents. That'll be the next video. Maybe not the very next video I'm doing, but coming soon. So that's all I have for you folks. Thanks for sticking around this long. I appreciate it. Everyone, take care.